Howdy, Ags. I'm Kyle McClinigan, the multimedia editor for the Battalion. Today is February 3rd, 2022, and welcome to this week's episode of The Bat Signal. So, up first, a bus driver shortage on campus has led to many students experiencing delays and has caused some to question whether bus drivers are receiving enough pay or enough training. Joining me today is Grant McLaurin, the reporter who's been covering the story. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So how many bus drivers is A&M supposed to have, and how many do we have so far this semester?
Yeah, so at any given time, the A&M bus system is able to have around 300 student drivers, as well as 25 to 30 budgeted full-time drivers. However, at this time, they are training 25 to 45 new drivers to add to the fleet. The number of trainees seems high and can partly be explained due to the number of students graduating, and so they're leaving the campus and searching for work elsewhere. But in other instances, students often quit due to the intense workload required from drivers. Although the minimum number of hours per week is 12, the job is fast-paced and requires a significant amount of multitasking.
Yeah, so what are some of the reasons leading to the shortages, like you said earlier, about the long hours and the lackluster pay?
Yeah, so as I just kind of pointed out, the job is difficult and there are relatively long hours, and so it's not for everyone. That means that many spots come available due to graduating seniors and students that are quitting. However, current impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have put a pause in hiring due to the online and hybrid model errors of the pandemic. And at the time, demand placed on the bus system was very low. So not as many drivers were required to sufficiently appease demand. Now that students are returning to in-person classes, the number of bus drivers is just not enough to accommodate the influx of students, especially during the first few weeks of classes.
Mm-hmm. So how have students been reacting to this shortage?
Yeah. Currently, there are many stories that you'd find online describing students being left at bus stops or being late to class because the bus failed to arrive at the time posted on the transportation portal. And so these two factors have injured the transportation department's credibility to supply students with a constant and reliable form of transportation.
Does transportation have any kind of plan in place to deal with the surge of students during the first few weeks of classes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Currently, no. The transportation department anticipates this influx of students during the beginning of each semester. So although this may seem worse, there have always been more students attending classes during the first few weeks of each semester, but due to the COVID pandemic, it may have seemed like it's been worse the last two. That being said, the transit department structures their bus system for the demand of the third week of classes. So the rationale behind this is that everyone is going to attend their classes during the first week of classes, which seems to be true, but not all students will attend the third week of classes, which also seems to be true. It remains to be seen whether students actually refrain from attending classes or whether they choose to reach classes through means other than the bus system, due to their inability to handle demand in their experience of the first 2 weeks of classes.
Okay, so does it seem like the problem is going to clear up as we get further into the semester, like usual? I feel like this is a discussion that happens at the beginning of every semester. Or do you think the shortage of bus drivers is going to cause it to be a problem for longer than just like the first 2 or 3 weeks of class?
Yeah, so like you said, it's the same problem occurs at the beginning of every semester. But currently, the amount of student drivers that we have is still a third too low, and so we could see this problem persisting. It's hard to tell.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us, Grant.
Yeah, thank you.
So last week, Justice Stephen Breyer announced his retirement from the Supreme Court, leaving President Biden with the opportunity to deliver on his campaign promise of nominating the first black woman. Nathan Varnell, the assistant opinion editor for the Battalion, has joined us today to give us some insight on some of Biden's rumored picks and if he'll be able to deliver on time. Thanks for joining us, Nathan.
Happy to.
For many people, Breyer's retirement announcement came as a surprise. Do you think the White House is going to be able to deliver on time?
Well, with Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, they stepped on it. Pedal to the metal, and Chuck Schumer has indicated that he's trying to have the exact same process. They're actually taking the same sort of outline of steps for the Senate as they did with Amy Coney Barrett, and that was done in just over a month, I believe. So I imagine this is going to go on pretty quickly. We've already seen that Biden is getting in meetings with not only major caucus figures like the Congressional Black Caucus and House of Representatives Majority Whip Clyburn, but also with Senate Republicans. Senator Collins of Maine and Senator Murkowski are suspected to be favorable to flipping from their more moderate positions to favor any of the black women as candidates. So I know that Biden is trying to have these meetings pretty quickly from all the news that's been reported so far.
Who are some of the potential candidates that have been getting the most attention so far? And what do you think of President Biden limiting the candidate pool to only black women?
Well, drawing from our opinion columnist Kaylin Connor's piece, which will be out this week in web and in print, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is among the women most speculated to be appointed. She's a Harvard Law graduate, served under Justice Breyer, like many of the potential candidates being reported, as a clerk, and has been appointed by former President Obama and Biden, both under their respective terms, to different positions. District Court Judge, and now United States Circuit Judge. So there's a bunch of very commendable accomplishments and a huge resume. She's very, very qualified. Same with Leandra Kruger, who's currently serving as a justice on the California Supreme Court. She's a Yale Law graduate, served as a clerk for Justice John Paul Stevens, and as acting Deputy Solicitor General under the Obama administration. Like pretty much all current and former Supreme Court justices, these two candidates will fit nicely in the exclusive club of all coming from Ivy League schools. However, what I believe to be the most likely candidate, Julianna Michelle Childs, does not actually come from an Ivy League background, but has the support of Majority Whip Clyburn and a equally bulky resume. I mean, Biden nominated her to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, and she's also served as commissioner on the South Carolina Workers' Compensation Commission and deputy director of the South Carolina Department of Labor Licensing and Regulations. So she has this very progressive background and is probably a favorite among the progressives in Congress.
Okay, so given all that, who do you think is most likely to be nominated to the position?
Definitely Childs, if Biden does not capitulate to some of the demands that are out there right now. For instance, McConnell said recently that the American people elected a Senate that is evenly split at 50-50, and so to the degree that Biden received a mandate, it was to govern from the middle. And Biden is, for better or worse, very favorable to this kind of rhetoric. He's recently shown that he may not be so favorable, such as in his speeches on the Voting Rights Act. He seems to be taking a more lined-in-the-sand approach to things. But he also expressed surprise at how much ire the restriction of nomination to just black women drew from Republicans and the conservative public. Opinion writer Alex Korshev wrote on the opposite side of the issue from columnist Kaylin Connor, saying that, and pointing out, according to polls, that the majority of Americans actually favor nominating based off of qualifications instead of race or gender. Conservatives have since made this a point of attack in their arguments, saying that this is liberal virtue signaling and that, you're caring too much about race or gender instead of more meaningful legal qualifications. And no matter what you think about that, it is more likely that Biden would have seen less criticism if he had just nominated a black woman out at the front instead of saying that he was only going to nominate black women. So it's hard to see where he's going to fall on the issue.
As I'm sure you know, in the past months, Democrats have struggled to get anything through the Senate given their slim majority. Do you think this could lead to issues in completing the nomination process, especially since it's not guaranteed that they will keep their majority in Congress after the midterms?
Actually, I don't think there will be much of a hurdle thanks to Mitch McConnell. In 2017, to ensure that Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch could be confirmed, a rule was changed so that it only requires a simple majority vote. The filibuster can't be enacted, for instance, which has been the main holdup for a bunch of policy that's been trying to pass the Senate, such as the aforementioned Voting Rights Act. And, ironically, with Mitch McConnell saying now that President Biden should pick and govern from the middle, it was the same man and the same caucus who rushed through Gorsuch and expressly told the Democratic leadership that You know, they weren't going to pay any mind and just use the 52-seat majority that they had back in 2017 to push it through. So given the attitude of Schumer and Biden right now, I expect it to go through without a hitch.
Okay, so what does this mean for the future of the Supreme Court, and could this affect some of the upcoming hearings?
Well, it's hard to know what cases will actually be seen by Breyer's replacement. But cases take a lot of time to be worked on, and it's, not unprecedented for a justice to change in the middle of court proceedings. But also, there's a lot of Republican and Democrat think tanks that make repeated challenges, a bunch of law centers that will draft up some sort of case, some sort of suit that is identical to ones that have been done in the past, such as Roe v. Wade, for instance, or Planned Parenthood v. Casey, to challenge those same standards on topics like abortion. Right now, there is a case in the Supreme Court to that very effect that could go so far as to overrule abortion rights entirely. So it's unclear what exactly this candidate will preside over, but I believe that the sort of descriptive representation of having a black woman on the Supreme Court lends to it not just being a switcheroo of one liberal justice for another. It could mean that different measures of scrutiny are actually applied to these cases. There's the federal vaccine mandate case that just got struck down recently and may be re-challenged. There's the first major Second Amendment case in over 11 years coming into the court. And these things are likely to have very complex decisions come down. Democrats aren't likely to be in the majority, or rather, the liberal justices aren't likely to be in the majority. But given how the justices fall on an issue, there may be a very complex set of measures for how future cases are to be determined based on their decision, in which case a more progressive judge could push for a different scope. So it will have a tangible effect on future decisions.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. A&M is offering new resources for students and faculty. Here to provide more on the story is Michaela Rush. Thanks for being with us, Michaela.
Yeah, good to be here.
Okay, so are we seeing any change in the number of COVID-19 cases over the past weeks?
Yeah. So since we've been here in the past week, from January 22nd to January 29th, we've seen a very slight decrease in the positivity rate of COVID cases. And by slight, I mean 25.5% to 25.1%. And just to clarify, significant of a positivity rate means you take the total number of people who've gotten tested and then what percent of those people are positive. So this is people who are choosing to get tested. Something interesting about this is that the number of tests that have been occurring these weeks and then the weeks prior to classes starting, so the 15th and the 8th of January, are actually about the same. So many of the folks who are getting tested now are likely the same folks who were getting tested before. With that, though, it's important to note that we do also have a lot of new measures on campus to help students with COVID safety.
Yeah, and what are some of those new services?
Yeah, so something that's really great is students now have excused absences for anything COVID related. So that includes whether you contract the virus, whether you have come in close contact with somebody. So students of course, should stay home if they have been exposed or if they're not feeling well. And they can also now ensure that won't negatively impact their grades, even for fully in-person classes. Also, there are free KN95 masks through the White House. Anyone can request to get them sent to their home, and grocery stores like H-E-B as well as Kroger are also offering free masks. I believe the limit is currently 3 per person, but even still, that's very helpful. And of course, all of the measures that A&M has had in place continue to occur. So if you go onto covid.tamu.edu, you can find information on the self-report forms, the current numbers, testing on campus, as well as vaccinations on campus. All these services are free for students, and I believe they're also free for faculty. But it's just really important that students continue to be mindful, especially as we have seen a lot of cases related to the Omicron variant.
Okay, and how long does it look like we're going to be dealing with this most recent surge?
Well, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't speak on that particularly, but there has been studies that have shown that COVID is more likely to be spread during colder weather seasons, so it likely has something to do with that. But really the best thing we can do to control the surge is just making sure that we're using all of these great resources that we have available as students.
Okay, well, thank you so much for providing an update.
Yeah.
With classes canceled, it is important for students and faculty to be prepared for another round of cold weather. The National Weather Service recommends turning on central heat before the storm and keeping it above 65 degrees. It also recommends to have dry food, backup batteries for electronics, and to keep faucets and cabinets open to prevent water lines from freezing. If ice does accumulate, it is recommended to limit travel and only leave your house if necessary. This week's contributors are Grant McLaurin, Kellen Connor, Alec Korbachev, and Aubrey Vogel. This week's episode was produced and edited by Kyle McClinigan.